Hello, I'm Yusuf Ehrman. Welcome to this special edition of Straight Talk from Amman, Jordan. Join me as I sit down with the country's former crown prince to get his take on how Jordan is navigating an increasingly unstable region and what solutions could be available to prevent the worst-case scenario, an all-out regional war. Surrounded by conflict on nearly every border, Jordan sits at the heart of a region under immense pressure. To its west, there's the war in Gaza and ongoing Israeli actions in the occupied West Bank. To the north, a still fractured Syria. And now, the fallout from the Iran-Israel conflict threatens to spill across a wider region. Amid rising nuclear tensions and deepening geopolitical fractures, the Hashemite Kingdom is once again forced to navigate crisis after crisis right on its doorstep. As Türkiye steps up regional mediation and diplomacy, Jordan has taken a quieter but no less critical role, advocating for long-term solutions rooted in human dignity, cooperation, and dialogue. Guided by the decades-long vision of Prince Hassan bin Talal, Amman has pushed for frameworks like a new International Humanitarian Order, nuclear security dialogue, and regional cultural diplomacy. In a moment defined by fragmentation, Jordan is positioning itself not as a combatant, but as a conveyor, a country pushing for peace through principles, partnerships, and people. I sat down with the former Crown Prince to get a deeper understanding of his vision and what he hopes to achieve. Joining me now is His Royal Highness Prince Hassan. Thanks for joining me. We have a lot to talk about. I mean, when we look at the region, conflicts everywhere, human tragedy everywhere. I want to talk a little about the new International Humanitarian Order. Now, this is something you advocated about. And when we look at these conflicts throughout the globe, whether it's very nearby in Gaza or between Israel and Iran, what just happened in Syria, or even farther away in Ukraine and Russia, how are you viewing this global conjecture that we're in right now?
Well, if you look at 35 degrees north, that is to say the longitude from the Baltics all the way down to Madagascar, there are 10 wars raging as we speak. And the reason for this could be explained by the fact that the West is basically industrialized, high-tech, searching for rare earth minerals. And Asia and Africa provide those opportunities, those purely business opportunities. So the wars effectively are basically an exposure to death. They are not wars based on any international legal notion of morality or human dignity. And the result was that in 1987 we produced, as to say, a group of wise men and women, including Robert McNamara from the United States, Simone Weil, herself a Holocaust survivor, from France, Ruzhin from China, Blizhenko from Russia, David Owen from the United Kingdom. The Security Council was represented, the Global South was represented, 27 nationalities. And we addressed the outstanding issues of our time: man against man, man against nature, and man-made disasters. But we did not address the subject of necropolitics, which is basically exposure to death. So basically there are no laws to war, although it is called the law of war, other than those concessions to a humanitarian perspective, which Henri Dunant achieved in creating the International Red Cross. We have treatment of prisoners, treatment of children and so forth. But all of these are, as we see, being ignored, systematically ignored.
When we're following these conflicts, it seems that the human toll is just tremendous. I mean, just from a refugee or mass migration and mass exodus perspective, I believe over 1 million refugees here in Jordan, 4 million in Türkiye, a couple million have gone to the EU, the lucky ones, and just throughout the region. And there's this humiliation that the local people are facing, and you've advocated for this shift from humiliation back to human dignity. Now, how could that shape international law and the humanitarian responses that the belligerents and also regional countries are pondering in their minds?
Well, the region I'm talking about is the Mashriq, or the Levant. And the Levant, to my way of thinking, includes Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and of course Türkiye, Iran. So we have 300 million people, and the issues that we face are transboundary. Not only corona, to remind us effectively that disease is transboundary, but as you said, what I call territoriality, identity, and migration, TIM, which is the movement of peoples. So if we were supposed to be 3 million people in the 90s, today we're over 12 million people. And the reason for that is basically that we cannot continue to differentiate between nationals, migrants, immigrants. We have to talk about a multi-deprivation index, which is a concept I adopted to build on zakat. I mean, if the third provision as Muslims of our faith is to provide philanthropic assistance institutionally to needy people, and these categories are well known, then I think we have to be encouraged to do so, rather than continuing with the stereotype of the ugly Arab and the ugly Muslim and so forth. So we have to join international standards of doing things as a region. 300 million people, if you compare that with the Gulf and Saudi Arabia, they're up to 37 million people. But we include that woven fabric of different ethnicities, which is so important to understand in the context of pluralism, not polarity of hatreds, which is what is happening at the moment, but the plurality of working together on common and creative commons, which of course include physical, all the global warming and so forth, human, the consequences of war, which we see every single day in Gaza and what is happening there, and then the occupied territories, and of course spiritual. I mean, Jerusalem was supposed to be a city of joy for the whole earth. Today it is now gradually being Judaized.
Yes, yes, it is. You mentioned 10 conflicts in the region, just in the near vicinity, and you called them all illegal conflicts. There's a law of peace. There's also a law of war, it seems, right now. And it seems that the law of war is dominating the law of peace, and it actually seems lawless, almost, the law of war. I mean, I remember previous wars, there was certain boundaries that countries wouldn't pass. For example, bombing hospitals was off limits. That seems to be a target now. Bombing civilian areas was once off limits. That seems to be acceptable now. How do we go back from this?
Winning back the human race. That's what we called a symposium we held just a few years ago, because we weren't getting anywhere with winning the human race. The United Nations cannibalized everything that we presented. For example, the United Nations Disaster Relief Organization became the Office for the Commissioner of Humanitarian Affairs. Enfants de la rue, street children, was something that we introduced, and different countries adopted this issue according to their internal workings, also the judiciary and the police. I think that the whole idea of dealing with problems that are a cause for war, jus bello, should not be addressed in the context of superimposing products of our different systems, justice system and so forth, so as to use always the stick rather than the carrot. So I would say that winning back the human race requires an immediate consultation by philosophers. I mean, for example, Slavoj Zizek in Czechoslovakia tells us that in a few years' time, maybe a third, as much as a third of the world's population will be substituted for in the workforce by robots. So do we just drift into that direction simply because we don't have the ability to change the morality of how governance, which is entirely a human exercise, is exercised? Do we continue to pander to the elites, the financial elites, and ask them to take the lead and the initiative? Or do we go back to the people, and particularly to the young? Because the whole idea of the humanitarian order was to talk about the future of future generations rather than just to talk about ourselves.
The order, basically the centerpiece was the United Nations. It was supposed to fix everything. It was this never again, after World War II, we're never going to go back to that again. We're going to have a brave new world on prosperity, security, peace. But it seems that the United Nations hasn't been able to keep those promises.
Well, exactly. I mean, 17 sustainable development goals, and effectively a deficit today, a financial deficit of $4 trillion between now and 2030 to effectively implement those goals. So ranging from climate change to humanitarian distress to children at war to the different enormous humanitarian challenges of controlling the situations that I described. I mean, you have Libya, you have Syria, you have Iraq, you have Afghanistan, you have Yemen, you have Sudan. Everyone trying to reconstruct post-war on the basis of an equal deal for everyone included. But I think that that's going to be very difficult, and that people in opposition, particularly armed opposition, are taking advantage of the fact that we have militarized all forms of humanitarian assistance. And basically, I think that this is going to create a great dichotomy for those of us who still believe in the term humanitarian. We didn't say humanist, because we would not be accused of being totally without fear of God. On the contrary, it's because we fear God most that we think that the time has come for a revisiting of human dignity.
I think a fear of God is very important. It does ground a man in peace, at least the desire to be able to bring peace forward from war. When we look at these massive multilateral organizations like the UN, I don't want to beat up on the UN too much, but I think it deserves some criticism, actually. But lately, we've been seeing more minilaterals. We saw it in Syria with the Astana group. We're seeing it in Gaza as well, with regional actors coming together. Do you believe that the era of the big, massive multilateral organizations is now coming to an end, and you're having more regional actors with stake or skin in the game on issues coming together in a more dynamic structure to solve these issues? Is that going to be the future of diplomacy and war resolution?
I can see the big economic actors coming together. I mean, you look at the Red Sea. On the one side, you have the Arabian Shield, the geological Arabian Shield. On the other side, you have the Nubian and Somali Shield. And the interest in 40,000 ounces of gold is paramount. It's not an interest in the social impact on what all of these navies and armies are doing in the Red Sea or in the Gulf region alone, or not doing, intervening militarily whenever it is acceptable for them. And we've seen the recent situation developing into a war with Iran and so forth. But I think that the main thing is that there is absolutely no consideration of stabilizing a region. And if we look at the Red Sea minerals, the plethora of international companies belonging to huge finance houses like BlackRock and whatever they're called, Vanguard and so forth, basically they are calling the tune of how international interests are managed. And as you saw in Ukraine and Russia, the whole issue of rare earth minerals suddenly cropped up. So are minerals more important than people? Is human dignity still woefully, without any concern, hospital after hospital being bombed, children being displaced in both physically and mentally, does not bode well for the future. It may bode well for recruitment of terrorists of the future, and this is probably what we are seeing they are being committed to. But it seems that perpetuating war rather than preventing it is one aspect. They talk about management of crises. How long can you manage a crisis? Is the crisis in itself a money earner for weapons and forms of what they call, I call sometimes mass distraction rather than mass destruction? I've addressed all of these issues in the past, and I'd love to share some of these
You've
thoughts.
touched on corporations twice, so I want to ask you about that. Have we reached a moment of singularity where corporate interests have now surpassed state interests and the corporations are actually giving direction to these global issues? Are you concerned about that these companies, these mega supranational, international, multinational companies have become too powerful?
I think it's absolutely a fact today, and I think that also the fact that governments are not so long ago calling for achieving those development goals, as I said, 17 goals, through partnership. I don't see the partnership, we spoke about the United Nations a minute ago, unless and until we develop a united peoples, which is what my friend Sandeep Aslekar in the Foresight Group in India, representing the Global South as I see him, has called for. We need the contact of people like Vandana Shiva, for example, in India, who talks about the nutrition and malnutrition crisis in the world and should be listened to. We have savants in every field of humanitarian action, but unfortunately, with the, by definition, governmental structuralism of the United Nations, it's difficult to shift interest into prioritization. And consequently, the absence of a multi-deprivation index, which tells you exactly what every person needs at every phase of his or her life, whether in terms of electricity, cooking oil at the bottom of the ladder, or in terms of a better life provided by the opposite of a multi-harassment index. What we see in Gaza today, no water, no electricity, no education, is leading us to educide, herbicide, but our ability to think for ourselves, what I call cogito sphere, is being severely impacted. We have no ability to think independently for ourselves. So where do we find the courage to make peace if we don't have a will to make peace? We need coalitions of the caring and not only coalitions of the willing in the material sense.
It seems there's more willing to go to war than caring to work for peace.
Absolutely, because it's a money-making exercise.
I want to ask you a little about Türkiye, a country that you know very well, a leadership that you know very well. President Erdogan has been working to try to further peace between Russia and Ukraine. He's also been a big advocate for Gaza. The recent conflict between Israel and Iran is something that greatly concerns Türkiye as well. And I would like to think that they played a big role in having this Syrian revolution come to a positive conclusion with the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. How do you view his initiatives, and how do you view the relationship between Türkiye and Jordan right now?
Well, I don't speak officially for Jordan. I'm track 2. I met Tayyip Erdogan on one occasion, and that was when we were both together to honor the memory of Hassan, who was the head, as you know, of the International Pediatric Association, a true humanitarian. But since then, I just want to say that in terms of everything I can say about Turkey is also conditioned by the fact that I too am descended on my mother's side by pashas of the Ottoman state. I am a direct descendant of my father's side of a member of the Majlis al-Mab'uthan. So I want to say from the outset that when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk met with King Abdullah ibn Hussein, my grandfather, there was a discussion. Why did you, the Arabs, take a position against us, meaning Ottoman, Turkish? It was vague at the time. And he said, well, we took the same position that you took against the Young Turk movement. I mean, the Ottoman Empire had already, by 1911, had gone into decline. But I'm deeply conscious that across this valley, we're talking about a Palestine that was defended by the 6th Army of the Ottoman state, whose fallen soldiers are revered in the Turkish cemetery in Salt, just up the road. So we have long and abiding relations, but I would advise you to look at a book by a man called Shambrook quite recently called The Policy of Deceit, which describes the last days of the British Empire in this region. I'd like you to suggest to you Sidney Bailey, also of the Quakers, who wrote about the 4 rusty nails that I call them rusty nails of Kashmir, Cyprus, Northern Ireland, and of course Palestine. Northern Ireland, as we're reminded continuously, achieved a solution in the Good Friday Agreement. And I've met with conflict resolution people all over the world. And therefore I go back to Türkiye and say that you were initiators of the water diplomacy, conflict resolution in water diplomacy. And I personally think that the involvement with Syria today should be in the context of reminding us all that this whole region was Syria. There was no Palestine. There was no Jewish question in 1919. My great uncle, King Faisal I in Syria, called for a pluralist constitution. And this pluralism is what we have to work towards in terms of Ajam Arab, in terms of containing and ending any forms of ethnic or friction between us, removing this uncertainty over differences with the other and trying to place ourselves in the shoes of the other to understand by analogy where we stand in terms of Southwest Asia, in terms of the Turkic belt between Türkiye and China.
I want to ask you about Syria. After more than a decade of war, there's been a conclusion now. How do you view the direction Damascus is going in? And does Jordan want to play a very hands-on role with Syria? Does it want to have strong cooperation with the new leadership?
I think there's a full understanding of the fact that the stabilization of the region means the close cooperation between Syrian, Lebanese, Jordanian, Iraqi, and for that matter, Palestinian. Because as you can see, on our west, we have a border with Palestine and with Israel. In our north, we have a border with Syria, which has often been troubled, and now we hope can move towards a more stable situation. You know, once an Israeli told me, we are surrounded by enemies. I said, well, that is what we always hear from you, but you think you have a problem? We're surrounded by friends. So,
Why are our Arabs so divided? I mean, I even look at the Arab League when they come together trying to provide a solution for Gaza, or throughout the Arab Spring, the many conflicts that were brewing in the Middle East. And I just can't see them unite to come with a solution that would benefit all of them. What is this division?
Arabs and Muslims, since the days of the Prophet or Peygamber, even at his last few words in Khutbah al-Wida, moved immediately towards conflicts over succession and so forth. So if since that time, 1400 years, we've been divided, what is going to bring us together? I think that we have to take a firm stance against egocentric approaches. We are very egocentric. The Arabs, each one of us has a song to sing. But the idea of institutionally bringing the Arabs together is not through an Arab League, which is a token in 1945, which was basically to say to the world, well, you have your regional representation. We need an OECD for the region, which includes Türkiye and Iran by all means, but basically focuses on a law-based order, so that every quarter, every 3 months, we send our reports to the international organizations, IMF and IBRD and so forth. We don't listen to what others have to implement at our expense. And of course, when they say, Israel, why do you exclude us? I'm not excluding anybody. I think that they have to play the political game and the policy game by the internationally accepted norms and rules. But it seems that they have left that behind them some time ago.
I want to talk a little about a nuclear Middle East, whether it's heading in that direction or there's going to be a U-turn. Now, this is something that is very important to you, that you've advocated for regional countries to come together to stop proliferation, to have some type of control mechanism. Does it concern you to have a nuclear armed Middle East?
Well, I just want to say that of course it concerns us, because CEP, the circular error probability of any missile with a warhead landing anywhere around here within 70 kilometers radius will kill us all as we're speaking now. So I just want to emphasize that in a conference that we held a month ago, thereabouts, we had the participation of the nuclear proliferation people with NTI, the Nuclear Threat Initiative. As you know, that we are neighboring a country which is an undeclared nuclear country, and which everybody approves of simply because of its Western leanings. I mean, the West do not allow them themselves to talk about the nuclear capability of Israel. But obviously that has spurred many countries to try and develop nuclear power. Today we have rogue states, maverick states, including Pakistan and India, and not to mention North Korea. So any attempts to improve relations with the international community are usually stymied because these countries are regarded as access to purpose or to need. But finally, I think that the world has to sit down and discuss what is required in terms of nuclear power for clean water, for example, or clean energy. And there I would thank Warren Buffett, who years ago spoke about in the Turkic states, your neighbor in Türkiye, about making a fund for advanced refinement of energy, that the enriched energy would go to those countries who are already recognized in the context largely of the Security Council countries. And the low enriched uranium would remain for nuclear purposes. But nothing of this kind has ever been followed up. It's always singling out this country, singling out that country. And obviously there are many wannabe nuclear states in the region, but do they have to be wannabe nuclear armed states or wannabe nuclear energy states? So this is a detailed issue that has to be discussed. We had the IAEA here, we had the NTI here, we had our own Atomic Energy Agency, but there is no way of stopping competitiveness on this issue unless the priorities are redefined.
The United States recently bombed the nuclear sites in Iran, and one of the reasons why President Trump said was to stop them from developing a nuclear weapon. Do you think this will stop them, or do you think this will show them that they really need to get a deterrent?
Well, obviously they've muddied the waters in the sense that the Iranians now are not receiving the inspectors as they did and should. And probably this is also conflated by the overall picture of the Iranian policies in the region, Iranian proxies in the region, whether Hezbollah or Hamas or however they are described. So I think that this concept of turning Gaza into a backwater, where the Israelis basically say Gaza is our secondary arena of interest, and then focusing on Iran, is basically, and of course we're on the cusp of a meeting between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States. It is all extremely worrying, because it is basically a question of, is it greater Israel, the Crusader state as they see it, with the evangelists who support them, expanding further into the region as the policeman of the region on behalf of the West, unchecked, or is it basically an Israel that wants to address the basic issues?
Which one is it for you? Is it an expand? Are these actions Israel trying to expand, or is it just security concern?
Well, left unfettered and unchecked, I think it is probably Israel desirous of expansion. Of course, it's very difficult to say this just a couple of kilometers from the River Jordan, where we have been heavily criticized by many people for maintaining a stable region. But we are, after all, the last window onto occupied Palestine and onto Israel. So we have signed the peace treaty. Egypt has signed the peace treaty. And we honor that peace treaty. But the point comes where everything is melting. Morals no longer exist. Politically, the policy-oriented initiatives. I mean, if you have a policy of stabilizing a region, say so. But if you have a policy of expanding into that region for personal reasons, historical reasons, whatever reasons, then you have your own narrative to blame or to exploit. And this is where I think that even in terms of culture, I mean, when we signed the agreement, all our syllabus was supposed to be reviewed, so we removed inflammatory clauses. Today, we don't talk about the West Bank, we talk about Judea and Samaria, or so they would like us to have it. So why is it the overlay of their priorities is always given the limelight in terms of international perception and their own perception?
I want to talk a little about this venue. You specifically chose it, has a lot of historic meaning. Yes. I mean, while we're talking right now, we can hear birds chirping. Yes. But about 100, 200 kilometers away, there's bombs going off. There's war. And as you said, it's very, very peaceful here. But unfortunately, beyond the horizon, people are not enjoying that peace. What's the significance of this area? And also, when you think about what's happening just beyond that horizon, how will there be peace in Gaza?
You know, the whole concept of the nexus of water, energy, food, and ecosphere is a cluster that in terms of Blue Peace was an initiative that we took, in which we included all the participants in this region, including Iran and Israel at a given moment. Iran and Israel attended our synchrotron meetings when we developed the Sesame collider synchrotron coming from the Geneva initiative of that kind, which is well known internationally. I can't tell you offhand whether Türkiye is a member or not, but I think certainly we had participation from Türkiye in the NTI meetings. But I want to say that this kind of cooperation for the future of the region seems utopian when political realities on the ground, as you said, the bombing in Gaza, the destruction of buildings and the continuous harassment of farmers and Bedouin herders in the West Bank continues. And of course, the last steps to encircle Jerusalem entirely. I mean, I talk about the management of holy space in Jerusalem. And we had a meeting, the second meeting of the historians of Jerusalem quite recently, including participation from the whole region, including Jewish participation. But how can we possibly move forward on that agenda of making peace if you have 2 or 3 nationalist figures who are absolutely driven by this idea of ethnic nationalism, religious nationalism, and so forth? I think ideologues do not, by definition, converse, because it's either my way or the highway. And this was what the Arabs were criticized for years, from the Nasser period and before, too strongly nationalist. This area has been described as a potential area for the implementation of the so-called Abraham Accords. Which Abraham are we talking about? Is he Abraham of Ur, of the Chaldeans? Is he the Abraham of Mount Moriah, of Jewish preference? Is it Abraham of, is he Abraham of Mecca? And we go back to Hagarism, of course, and so forth. It's very difficult. Why was it not the Noah Accords, for example? Noah created, as you know, in Türkiye, you have the Noah's Ark. Why do we not consider saving humanity rather than saving or face-saving certain situations by applying a name which might become a brand name?
Do you feel the Abraham Accords have trickled down in the countries they were signed with amongst the population, or are they just mere paper with signatures?
Well, I think with all due respect to the Gulf states who attended the signing of the Abraham Accords, if you want to talk about solutions, talk about intra-independence. If you are a fabulously rich region of the world, look at the less fortunate in this Levant region, as I keep saying, Palestinian, Lebanese, Jordanian, Syrian, Iraqi, and then understand that we have 4 pillars of stability in the Mashriq. Kurd, I'm not using the definite article, I'm not saying the Kurd, I'm saying Kurd, Turk, Persian, and Arab. And each one of these brings to mind that we have entities that are component parts of our plurality. But if you don't do this and you don't respect, we have the right to protect, which has been passed by the international community. Now we need the right to respect each other. Either that, or you end up with dictators saying, I'm on the side of this grouping, or I favor that grouping. The time has come now to recognize that we have to grow up, we have to mature into a more pluralist region.
How invested is Jordan right now in peace diplomacy regarding the Israelis and the Palestinians? And I also want you to talk a little about the two-state solution. Will we ever see it, or is it just a gimmick word that's just thrown around right now? Is there any meaning left behind it?
Well, I think Jordan has kept the eye on the ball rigorously. Jordanian diplomacy has been rigorous in emphasizing the importance of a two-state solution and 67 borders and so forth. So in terms of the seriousness of intent, that is and will always be there. In terms of self-determination of peoples, I remember I wrote a book on self-determination of the Palestinians. I personally would like to say that this is absolutely an essential factor of any solution. After the misery and the tragedies that the Palestinian people have lived and been forced to live, the time has come to recognize that it is they who decide their future. So whether it's one state or two state or any other formula that could be conceived, it is up to the Palestinian people themselves to be owners of their own destiny.
If your book was published today, do you feel it would still be relevant?
Well, I would probably have called it ownership of peace. Self-determination is a major component of that. If you want to make peace with your erstwhile enemies or with your, as I said, your friends, you know, we have frenemies now, friends and enemies. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the other and to promote your own self-determination within a context that can possibly create a synergy of our commitment to peace. But there was a joke once on the misspelling of the word peace, P-I-E-C-E, a piece of this and a piece of that. The dominant occupant, occupying power, gives the impression that they want to have a piece of this and a piece of that. Today, if you look at Lou Theroux's documentary, The Settlers, you might have seen it quite recently. He speaks, the settlers speak basically of 10 million Israelis or 10 million appropriate Palestinians. And of course that includes the second-class citizens who are Palestinians but citizens of Israel. At this point, if you look at the lights of Jerusalem, the different communities, whether Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, are also on some degree of parity. So we're almost at a tipping point. Either we continue with the compelling force of the settlers and the occupiers, and if you look at Anthony Loewenstein's book, the Australian who wrote, calling the book the Palestine Laboratory, he defines how weapons of mass destruction, how weapons of spying are being used, whether in subjugating the people of Gaza or in using the occupied territories with these musta'marat, which are basically military colonies, are exploiting their position in conjunction with the United States and other partners. Many of them are now being discovered, partners in making weapons of destruction of one kind or another, whether they call it conventional or non-conventional. And even the demography has changed. In the past, it used to be large number of people from Eastern Europe. Now it's large numbers of people from Brooklyn and points west. So this has to be checked. Otherwise, the future is very difficult to predict.
There's a lot of identity politics, a lot of sectarianism. I mean, whether it's between Israel and Gaza, whether it's Shia, Sunni. When we look in Europe with the migration, it's created the rise of the far right. Even the election of Donald Trump was a reaction by the U.S. voter to migrants coming across the border. How do you see a return to intercultural dialogue and this exchange between cultures? I mean, how do we get back to being a melting pot? How do we get back to respecting our neighbor, respecting each other's religions? Because I feel the level of respect and tolerance people have for one another has greatly deteriorated over my 4+ decades that I've observed humanity.
I agree with you totally. I agree with you in a sense of what you're saying. The fact that it has devolved, self-destructed, as you may emphasize, since 1945, But let's remember that even in 1945, with the year that ended the World War, Rome, the city of Rome, the capital of the Holy of Holies of the Catholics and many in this world, was actually bombed. So there are no limits to extremism, fanaticism. And I think that this extremism, this fanaticism has grown largely because of bad governance in different countries all over the world, which have forced people to look for solutions through extremist methods. I mean, if we look at so-called terrorism, the underground movement, the Jewish movement in 1947, 48, was responsible for all kinds of atrocity that we conveniently forget. I mean, Israel was never a passive entity that accepted things as they are, and of course for good reason, because they were so badly treated when the years of the war revealed the horrors. But I think today there's no stratification of crimes against humanity, whether on our side or their side, so to speak. I don't care which side. The crimes against humanity need to be stratified and listed. And there again, as I say, educide, herbicide, domicide, infanticide. For God's sake, I mean, infanticide. Why is this acceptable to see for some and not for others? So I think that there is an abiding fear, maybe, that the war will stop, that peace might at least give us an opportunity to address what has happened, allow the journalists to enter Gaza who have been forbidden for such a long time.
Unfortunately, there's no documentation.
TRT journalists who do such a wonderful job.
When we talk about all these problems, I get very, very pessimistic. But inshallah, we can be more optimistic.
Well, inshallah, I think they say don't sleep between the graves, and you will not have bad nightmares. So I say sleep between the graves, understand the nightmares, and deal with them.
Well, hoping for a better future. Prince Hassan, thank you very much for a great conversation. You've been watching a special episode of Straight Talk from Amman, Jordan. I'm Yusuf Farim. See you next time.